Hey folks, welcome to the Adventure Sports Podcast. Today's a revisited episode. It is episode 1001. And I don't know what led me to pick this. I guess we were talking about it. I was talking about it with a friend recently. And I was like, you know what? We haven't replayed that episode in a very long time, like 4, 5, 6 years. And that's what it was. And this is episode 217. So we're going back almost 800 episodes with Steve Callahan. And this is a well-known story. There's documentaries about this. There's a very well-known book called Adrift, 76 Days Lost at Sea. And this is often called in one of the greatest adventure books of all time. It was a New York Times bestseller for more than 36 weeks. So we're going to hear this unbelievable story from Steve about being stuck on a life raft after his boat sank. And before we dive in, thank you so much to everybody that has helped us get to 1,000 episodes. If you haven't, go back and listen to that episode with Alistair Humphreys. And here's the first step in another 1,000 episode journey for our next 1,000 episodes. So thank you so much. Let's go ahead and dive in.
Welcome back to another episode of the Adventure Sports Podcast. This is Travis. On the line with me today is Steve Callahan. If you guys haven't heard of Steve Callahan, this guy is an experienced sailor, a naval architect. He's done a ton in sailing. And back when he was a young man, he had decided to set out on a trip over to England and then down south to join a race. And Steve found himself off the coast of Africa, floating adrift, and he wrote a book about it. And I want to talk to him today about that and let him tell you his story about those 76 days in a life raft on the Atlantic Ocean. So, first of all, Steve, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, good to have you. So let's back up a little bit. I kind of alluded to what we're going to be talking about, but I also mentioned you being a naval architect and having quite a bit of a sailing experience. So can you do me a favor and go back into your background a little bit and just kind of give us a taste of how you got started in sailing and fell in love with it?
Yeah, I started when I was, 11 or 12 or something like that. My Boy Scout master actually kind of taught me how to sail. He was kind of my sailing mentor, and I ended up sailing with him for years and years. And from really small boats, basically. I had a lot of interest. I've always had a lot of interest in small boats, and like Napoleon Solo, this little boat that I built to cross the Atlantic was a small boat. I was inspired by people like Robert Manry, who sailed Tinkerbell, a 13.5-foot boat, to England when I was a kid, and tales like Kon-Tiki and all these adventures, offshore adventures. And I just felt at home kind of once I was on the water. And I seemed to kind of basically understand what sailing was about. But anyway, so as I grew up, I was kind of passionate about it. And I don't know, kind of stumbled from one thing to another, really. I started out building boats, helped my dentist when I was a teenager. It was my after-school job was helping him build a 40-foot boat. And then I built a boat, and then I started helping other people build boats for a while. And then we moved to Maine, my first wife and I, and up here, I was getting increasingly interested in design, and my father was an architect. I grew up drawing and whatnot, and I got a job here in a design office in a design school, which we built up over the years. And came 79 or so. I built Napoleon Solo, which was to be a small, compact cruiser that could be kind of comfortable if you're willing to get bounced around a little bit in a little boat in the middle of the ocean. And sailed it to England with a buddy, and the boat fit the rules for a race called the Mini Transat race, which was limited to small boats. It was supposed to be an alternative to the offshore adventure races like single-handed transatlantic, which were getting, basically all big boats. and so it was a kind of newish race, and the designs were all really interesting. And so I set off in that, but I had damage on the boat, so dropped out in Spain and then sailed it down to along the coast of Spain and Portugal, out to Madeira and down to the Canaries, and left there January of 1982, and started to cross the Atlantic, the kind of the milk run, what should be the milk run. Once you get into the trade winds, you kind of blow over to the Caribbean, and the weather kind of kicked up a little bit. I wasn't too worried about it because I'd been on the boat at this point by probably 10 months, something like that, and we'd gone across the ocean. We'd seen gales and whatnot. But it seemed like something hit the boat in the middle of the night, and boom, and a lot of water came in quickly. And so I bailed out and basically spent the next 2.5 months trying to adjust, learn to live off the environment. Basically, I say it's like learning to live like an aquatic caveman, and eventually drifted west, which took 2.5 months, and landed on a little island in the Caribbean called Marie-Galante.
Well, there goes the whole story of 76 days adrift. So let's back up. I mean, obviously, what you just rattled off was a major life-changing event. So you had built this 21-foot boat to head over to England and enter into this race. You left Newport, Rhode Island, I think you said in 82, to do
That's
this.
Right.
Now,
no, 81. I actually left in 81.
Okay.
When I lost the boat was in early 82.
Okay.
Yeah, basically, essentially my whole life was kind of falling apart, frankly. It was like, I didn't know what I was doing with business. My marriage was basically gone south. We were living apart for a couple of years, and it was like, I'm packing up on this boat and going off and having this adventure I'd wanted to cross the Atlantic in a small boat, either alone or with somebody else, since I was like 12. So, that was the major impetus. And I was really interested, I've always been really interested in really efficient use of space. And boats are a really interesting blend of vehicle and habitat and art all at the same time. So that really all appealed to me. So, it was like chuck everything into this boat and go off and have the adventure, although it was a little bit more of an adventure than I probably wanted.
No doubt. Well, let's put this into perspective. A 21-foot sailboat is a trailerable boat. I mean, this is something you can pull behind a full-size pickup truck. This is not an ocean-going vessel as we would think about it.
Well, yes and no. Actually, I'm a firm believer in this, that survivability at sea has nothing to do with size. It's not the survivability of the vessel. I can't tell you how many times I've been in the middle of the ocean and seen things like light bulbs that have been out there for years in some cases. Seriously.
Right.
And you think they're the most fragile thing in the planet, but they just get tossed around in the waves. If you're in a small boat, you kind of design that in mind. Like Solo was a keel boat and had watertight compartments in it, which helped to save my ass, and was designed with the assumption that she probably would go upside down at some point, which she almost did once. And so you design it differently. It was designed as kind of a small ocean-going boat.
Right. So that's why I brought it up. I was wondering about the differences, comparison, contrast, doing it in a 21-foot boat versus a 45, 50-foot boat. Obviously, I would think
it's really different.
Right. So
really
go into
different.
that a little bit. If you would.
I've crossed the Atlantic and everything from half in a 6-foot life raft in the Napoleon Solo 21-footer to like 67-foot steel boat, and yeah, there's a world of difference, but. There's a saying also, bigger boat, bigger problems. The forces are really huge if something goes wrong, and there's like way out of your control. So there's a lot of appeal in small boats. But you're living close to the water, and you get bounced around a lot.
Right. Like
there was this guy, John Letcher, who sailed around the world in a 21-footer way before me, and a lovely little boat. And I met John once, and he said, yeah, but that's a young man's boat. As he got older, he got bigger boats that are a lot more comfy, in a way, but And the small boats have a lot of appeal because all the forces and stuff are more human sized on the boat, at least. The oceans, you're never going to beat that. But when something goes wrong in the boat, like I got dismasted and I was able to re-rig a mast on the boat single-handed, which I could never have done on like a 40-foot boat.
Yeah, that's interesting. There's definitely pros and cons to having a small boat and doing it.
Yeah. And that kind of appealed to me, and also the compact nature of it. It's kind of like backpacking across the ocean, and a lot of it's about being there, not so much as getting someplace.
Right. More some simplistic way to do it. That makes sense. I can understand that. So you headed out from Newport, Rhode Island, and you're heading over to England to join this regatta.
Right.
Tell me about that. So when you get to England, sorry, I'm from New England. When you get to England and you're going to join the race, how do the events play out there once you get over there?
In England?
Right.
Yeah, well, we got into Penzance in Cornwall, which is a lovely place. Oh my God, it was just fantastic to be there and to get there. Once we'd gotten there, it was like, oh man, I just like finished this childhood dream in a way. And it was great just hanging out there, and all the many Transat boats coming in, and all the other skippers, mostly young but some older, like this guy Brian, who was 50 years old when in the race. But it was incredibly rough. It was once we started, it was like it had been forecast for gales. It's North Atlantic, and like just gets nailed with all these low pressure systems and stuff. And so we kind of started out in that. When the race actually started, and kind of beat down the coast, and there was a lot of damage. Actually, even before the race, and some of the storms, a French sailor got killed coming across from France. He got smashed into the rocks, and so it was almost a grim mood. And that, in fact, early on in the race, I, getting just off the coast of France before the Bay of Biscay, I was coming along, and there was an Italian boat, and I was passing, and it didn't look right. The jib was kind of dangling a little bit in the water and whatnot. I keep trying to get him on the radio, and I'm yelling across to him. I don't get any response. It turned out later that he was actually below bailing. He was sinking. And,
oh, wow.
Yeah, there were two or three boats lost, and a lot of people had damage, including myself. So I put into Spain, into La Coruña. So there's a whole little gathering of us there, waited for weeks to get something other than gale conditions to get out of the Bay of Biscay and on our way again.
Wow! So this whole regatta had a kind of an ominous cloud over it. It sounds like from the beginning.
It did. There were a lot of dropouts in it. It was a tough year. Once you get south, it's tough at the beginning like that. And then the idea is, then you get south, you get to the, finally out to the Canary Islands, which are basically off the African coast, and stretch out quite a ways into the Atlantic. And then you get a downwind leg home. You get kind of the candy at the end of it, for that leg. Supposedly that should be the easier leg, but it can be pretty brutal at the beginning.
Yeah, sounds like it. Okay, so you're over here, you're 29 years old, you're solo sailing this 21-foot boat. Eventually, you get knocked out of the race, and I assume you get your repairs done, and you're going to head back home at this point, right?
Right. Yeah, I'm broke. I got everything I have pretty much is in the boat, other than a rusty old ancient pickup truck and a few tools at home. But pretty much everything's in the boat, and I'm assuming I'm going to sail across and probably go up to St. Croix, where I have a new buddy I met in Newport before I left, who is sort of creating a boatyard down there and has since operated a boatyard down there, building multi-hull catamarans primarily, but all kinds of vessels. And so at the time I thought, I'll go there and hang out and probably work in the boatyard and earn a few dollars, and then see what happened from there.
Okay. So now you're sailing, you're heading west across the Atlantic again, and let's slow down and go into some more of the detail about how this all happened. What were your feelings during it? So you're roughly 800 or 1,000 miles off of the shore of Africa when you wake up to water. So let's go into that.
Yeah, actually, I'm almost in the middle of the Atlantic because, like I say, the Canaries stretched way out, and I left from one of the western ones. I was about 800 miles west of there, so that put
Okay.
me way out in the ocean. But it still was like another 2,000 miles, 1,800 nautical miles to the Caribbean. It was a long way away.
Okay. So what was your first indication something was going wrong?
Oh, it was just kind of immediate. I was kind of, I had a beautiful week of sailing, actually. It was just like going downwind, and I had the autopilot was working for a change. And, I was like reading and exercising and listening to music, and everything was cool. And then it started blowing up pretty hard. And so I was kind of reaching across these waves, and they're so the wind and the waves are kind of on the side of the boat, but kind of going down as well, because you don't want to get sideswiped by these waves. And they were building up probably to about, I don't know, maybe a few meters, 9 feet, which means you get bigger ones every once in a while and some smaller ones and whatnot, but a lot of breakers. And so I was looking around the boat, making sure everything was cool, and I had just really short sail up, just enough to keep the boat going like 4 or 5 knots, kind of comfortably and in control. And I kept getting up and making sure everything was okay, everything looked cool, and kept laying down and then getting up and laying down. So I was tired of laying down with my clothes on. So stupidly, of course, I took almost all of them off, everything but my t-shirt.
Oh no.
and then boom, it just was like this huge. It seemed like this huge crash, and just water just flowing in. And I thought, oh, I'm screwed. And in early stages of survival, generally, there's so much going on, and I became very aware that we're not single dimensional. We're thinking a lot of things and feeling a lot of things at the same time. I mean, part of me was totally petrified. Part of me was feeling completely doomed. Part of me was like feeling like, you idiot for even being here. There was part of me that was amused once I got on deck that the camera had come on and was taking this really dramatic footage of this idiot in the middle of the ocean. And but through it all, kind of focusing on the stuff that I needed to do, on getting my knife out, trying to get my survival gear. I thought the boat was going to go down like a rock. And it did start that way. It just like stopped, and just like the whole front of the boat was like totally full of water. And I don't know, it's hard to judge time in those early stages of survival, but I figured like in a minute anyway, the boat was pretty much, the nose was completely underwater. And, so I actually left my survival bag below because I thought it was going down so quickly. So I got up on the deck and I got the life raft organized, which wasn't easy because by this time the boats were like really low in the water and all the waves are like sweeping across it, and sort of a disaster piece theater. And so got the life raft off and jumped in it, thinking if the boat went right down, then I was, I could let go and at least I had the raft. And but I didn't want to let go. Then I had it well secured to the boat, and it became obvious that although the entire, sort of this whole front half of the boat was totally underwater, sort of nosing down, the back half had with the watertight compartments also developed an air pocket, and it was enough to keep the back kind of afloat when it wasn't underwater with passing waves. So then so I pulled up the side and dove back inside. Getting the survival gear was like really critical. And I had other packages of food and stuff that I wanted to get to, but the priority was first of all the survival kit, and then after that, whatever else my hands found, which included a cushion and stuff. But I'm wrestling all this stuff in the boat into this, up on the deck and into the raft, and trying to stay on the boat, get waves washing over it and whatnot. And after I get the basic kit in, this cushion and a sleeping bag, I'm totally exhausted. And I'm also cut up a little bit and this and that from some little accidents. And so I decided to kind of stand off from the boat. But the boat full of water is like a super sea anchor, and the raft is really light. It's kind of bobbling around on the water. So all these, when it gets hit by breaking waves, it's kind of like being in an auto accident. And the whole raft kind of folds up on you, and water's pouring in. And I got everything tied into the raft at this point, and I was worried though it might get torn apart. And after a while, just before dawn, there was a big wave hit the raft, and then it seemed like kind of peaceful, relatively peaceful anyway. And so I looked out and saw that I was drifting away from the boat. That the painter I had to the boat had something parted in the system, what I tied it to, or something had come off. And so I was drifting downwind pretty fast from the boat, which at this point was kind of laying on its side and, really about 2/3 underwater. I knew it was only a matter of time before it was probably going to go down. So it was kind of a mixed blessing, because had I been able to stay with the boat, I might have been able to get, really critical amounts of water and jugs and stuff like that. But the fact that the raft hadn't torn apart was pretty lucky too. So there I was, basically next stop was downwind and down current, the same place as I was heading really with the boat, but it was 1,800 nautical miles away.
Let's take a quick message break and hear from the folks that help make this show possible. One thing you might not know about me is I can get down with some cowboy boots. On the weekends, I like to kind of explore my countryside a little bit. I grew up in the country near cattle farms and ranches, so I've spent my fair share of time around cowboy boots and appreciate high-quality boots. And that's why I'm a big fan of Tecovas. Tecovas is my favorite boot brand. They're bringing a fresh perspective to heritage boot making. They carry on time-honored traditions and quality that you find in a great pair of cowboy boots, but they've innovated on comfort, style, and service. Their Western boots for men and women are handmade from the most premium leathers and over 200 time-honored individual steps. And their service is unmatched. If you go into the store, you're greeted like family, offered a boot shine and a drink, and you can get custom fitted for a new pair of boots right there. You can find all their store locations at tecovas.com. And if you can't make it into the store, Tecovas delivers the most premium quality and most comfortable Western goods right to your door. Visit tecovas.com. That's TECOVAS.com and point your toes west. That is plenty of that for now. Let's get back into the episode.
Well, let's talk about your ditch kit that you had left on board and had to go back to get. You had some trouble getting that, right? I mean, to paint the picture, you had to dive back down underwater to go cut this ditch kit away from the boat.
Yeah,
right?
in the dark, I couldn't see anything. It was all by braille, just down there kind of feeling around stuff.
So you leave a sinking boat for the safety of a life raft, yet you realize that you're not going to survive, but a day or two without your ditch kit. So you have to make the decision to dive back down under the sinking boat, not knowing if it's not going to drop down, like you said, to the bottom of the ocean. You have to do it.
Yeah, I was never sure either. Wave, like I came up once with some stuff, and this wave had slammed the hatch shut, and all there was like water over the top of the whole boat, and it was like, well, maybe this is it, maybe it's going down. But then the wave went by, and I was able to get the hatch open again and get out of there.
So was that just a moment of utter panic, or it was just kind of this?
A little moment of panic.
Wow.
within sort of a genre of panic of the moment. It was it was all pretty. Obviously it was pretty scary, and but I was fortunate to get out, and I was fortunate in the trip. There was like in Adrift, in the book that I wrote, I tried to bring that out because I became starkly aware of how everything is, a two-sided coin or a two-edged sword. And, I was really, in a way, unfortunate that I didn't have somebody with me, but I was also very, very fortunate because there's probably really highly likelihood that at least one of us, if not both of us, would have died if I'd been with somebody else.
Right, sure. So now you have your ditch kit, and obviously it's got to be the most important thing in your life at this point that you have this. So let's go into what was in it that would aid you in survival? I mean, this is in hindsight, you're probably thinking I should have done this or this or this, but you have this ditch kit. So what's in it? What do you have in your life raft with you?
I was actually pretty prepared. I'd been working in the trade, doing boat deliveries, and I had a lot of friends who were like, kind of professional. They were all professional sailors, or professionals in the trade. And so I knew people who had been on the edge before. I was very cognizant that really bad things can happen. So I had a 6-person life raft, and the raft had some gear in it, including water, cans of water, which were really important, including 2 solar stills, which were packed into the raft itself. And they would basically provide me with, almost all of my drinking water because I had very little rain. There were, in my own kit, one of the most fortunate things I had was a little shorty spear gun, which I'd bought in the Canary Islands figuring, I'll get to the Caribbean and do a little spear fishing. But it was, it's like the micro version of a spear gun. It was really small. But in Solo, everywhere I put it was like a nuisance. It was, I hit my head on it or something. And finally I said, maybe this will just fit in the bag, which it just did, catty corner. So I was really lucky to have that.
Wow.
And all kinds of, basic stuff like knives, 1/8-inch cutting board, all kinds of twine, string, and basically everything becomes an important resource.
Yeah.
When you're in that environment, the most unexpected things become really important. Like, there was a lifeboat survivor I interviewed from the Second World War, and the captain of the boat needed a navigational instrument, and so he used a piece of biscuit paper because he knew it was, you fold it in half and you got 2 45-degree angles, you fold it in half again and it's 22 1/4, and they were navigating using the biscuit paper, so everything can become a resource.
That's good to know that kind of stuff. So back to this spear gun. This was not part of your original survival or ditch kit. This was something you picked up kind of at the last minute just to go do some hobby fishing with.
Yeah, basically.
Wow.
Yeah.
So in this ditch kit, how many days of rations do you think you had?
Oh, not a lot. I only, I just had some peanuts and a few cans of stuff, but they got blown, like beans and things like that, and they got blown. I was too afraid to eat them. I was like, oh, here's poison. So I threw them before I even had a second thought about it. And I just stuff I grabbed. I had bags of food in the boat ready to go out, very, sort of quick release things, but I never got them. And they were sort of they would have been a separate sort of ditch kit, if you will, had I gotten them. So I didn't really have much food. I had a half a cabbage that floated out the cabin, a few eggs, which lasted about 10 seconds before they were dashed, and stuff like that. So I didn't have a lot, just some peanuts, some raisins, I think, not much. Food's not as critical, and I was aware of that. Water's the primary problem. First of all, loss of body heat, which is a problem. It was cold for me. It was really hard staying warm at night, especially, and because I was wet probably 50% of the time of the trip, and especially in the early days because it basically blew a gale for 3 days.
So out in the middle of the ocean, you don't normally hit things. You might bump up against some debris that happens to be floating out there, trash, but it's usually not something that's going to blow a hole in the side of your hull.
No, that's not true, actually. That's really not true. There's a lot of stuff floating around in the ocean. I mean, everybody's now familiar with the Pacific garbage dump, so to speak. But actually, in all the oceans, there's tons of debris. I've run across whole trees, containers, parts of broken boats. There's a lot of stuff out there to hit, and as well as whale. I think the most probably explanation of what happened to me was a whale was just swimming along, minding its own business, and we were both at the wrong place at the wrong time, and he gave me a good bump, and for Solo, that was a death blow. And that had happened to me before. I hit a sperm whale in '79 doing a delivery of a racing trimaran down to Bermuda. And we hit a sperm whale in the middle of the day. You could hardly see it. It's like almost all submerged, and and then there it is right in front of you. And for that owner of that boat, that was the second whale he'd hit that summer.
Really?
Yeah. So
Wow.
I hit a basking shark in a transatlantic race in '86 too, which is like a 25-foot animal with stopped a 60-foot aluminum racing boat dead, like boom. Yeah, I thought we'd broken a stay and the mast was going to come flying down, but then I saw it astern. It was this big lump of fish.
Wow.
So there's a lot of stuff that you can hit out there, and boats are actually it's a very common accident for voyagers.
Yeah, I had no idea. I'm blown away by the chances of actually hitting something like that. I never would have thought that one, I mean, I would think hitting a whale would be a once in a lifetime event, but it sounds a little more common than that.
Yeah, it is. If you do a lot of miles, because you're out, you're in a wilderness, so you're running across a lot of wild animals in their own domain, and like porpoise are just like amazing, they always know exactly where you are and whatnot. But think about it. You're in a sailboat, which doesn't create any noise from an engine, and I'm reaching across breaking 10-foot waves, so I'm not making any noise compared to what the ocean is around me. It's a very loud environment offshore, especially in heavy weather. Oh my God, it's people think sailing is like peaceful or something or
Right.
other. It'd be like a war zone in terms of noise and whatnot. So
Okay. So you think it's a whale. So now your boat is, mostly submerged and you're drifting away in your life raft. You have to cut that line and just let it go. What's going through your mind as your home is basically submerged and you're heading away from it into the vast ocean?
well, it's a really hard part of the like the general survival arc most people's experience in getting out of the boat or running out of the room that's on fire is kind of an initial stage, and if you get out of that, then especially if it's in an extended experience, you kind of enter into what survival psychologists sometimes call recoil, and it's for me, I call it disorientation and fear. It's like your whole old life is gone, totally gone, and you're in this other place, and no matter how familiar you think you are with it, you're like you have no idea how you're going to make a living, basically, and it takes a long time to figure that out. So it's tough, and plus, in my experience anyway, and I think it's quite common, you you beat yourself up a lot. Every failure you did, I know, I just like beat the hell out of myself, basically. How stupid could you be, and what was your life? And yeah, you fulfilled these, childhood goals, but what do they mean? Not really much. And you all your failures come back to haunt you, and it's a really kind of dark time while you're at the same time being challenged on every front just to get through the day, basically. So, but the will to survive is pretty strong. I know it is in me. So, you just kind of trudge forward and work your way through it, and eventually you figure out new systems. The whole idea is to get to adaptation, where you're essentially living off the environment which can go indefinitely. And there are cases of that. There's this Mexican fisherman who drifted across the whole Pacific. It took him 438 days.
I saw that.
He had a boat. He had a bigger boat than what I had as a life raft. So he had some advantages in many ways, but he showed, like people can last a really long time at sea if they can adapt to being there, and they're lucky enough to have a craft that kind of holds together.
Right. Right. You eventually just kind of succumb to the situation and realize how you're going to deal with it, and that's where you are. You just have to
and people have gone before. Like it was important to me that I had read all the survival books. The Baileys, who were adrift, a couple who were adrift they had two rafts in the Pacific who were adrift for 119 days. And there was Dougal Robertson, who's with a family. Whole family was in like a dinghy and a raft thing in the Pacific for 38 days. Who wrote this a really, I don't know, it was quite an inspirational book in survival literature called "Survive the Savage Seas." because it showed how creative he and his family were at making tools and adapting to the environment. It was really quite something, as the Baileys did, as everybody eventually has to. But I actually carried a survival manual written by Dougal Robertson, which was incredibly helpful. I probably read it like, I don't know how many times I read that thing. I probably knew it, verbatim almost, because you read the same information over and over. You're desperate for information that'll help you out,
Yeah, I'll bet.
And it was actually a good manual. It was quite a good manual. So, slowly working through the problems, initially trying to figure out the solar stills, how to get them to work, and, and learn to fish, basically.
Right. So let's talk about the solar stills. You had 3 of them on board, is that right?
I had 3 of them, yes.
Okay. And these were not new fangled products, right? These were from...
No. They were all that was available at the time for producing fresh water out of seawater, at least theoretically. Today we have reverse osmosis pumps where you can in a hand pump pump fresh water out of seawater, and most survival rafts and boats for offshore boats carry things like this.
Right.
But at the time, only solar stills existed, and there were some designs. These happened to be World War II surplus stills that were produced for flyers in the Second World War. And, they're like little environments, or atmospheres. You pour seawater in the top in a little cup, and it drips down to this really, really fine little hole, down onto a black cloth suspended on the inside of a balloon. And then theoretically, when the sun comes out, it evaporates the fresh water out of that seawater in the black on the inside, and it condenses on the inside of the balloon and kind of rains down into a little collection rim and then into a bag. But the problem was that the directions were to float these things in the water attached to the raft, which was a disaster because a wave would go by and the raft would kind of surge forward a bit, but the balloon being like really light and fluffy and everything, just like flying out there, and at the end of the tether wind was like a boom right at the end, and it tore the first one actually, and eventually, and it also was shaking them so hard that all the seawater is being flung out from the black cloth onto the sides of the balloon. So I was getting just bags full of seawater. So I was like, nah, that's not going to work. But I didn't really understand them until I cut one up. I decided it wasn't doing me any good that way. So I was going to kind of see how they worked and figure it out. And once I did, the second one, I just decided to put on the raft itself. But I had to keep the bottom wet because a lot of the seawater has to flush through this cloth that's on the bottom, actually a piece of cotton cloth, because once cotton is wet, it's airtight, but water passes through it. So, and eventually they wore out because it was on the raft and chafing, and also cotton soaked and dried eventually kind of rots out. But the last 2 would last me most of the trip. And if I was lucky, I could get, kind of a pint of water a day out of them. But it took me, 10 days or something to figure that out. Fortunately, I had 8 pints of water that I started with. So I was really thirsty when I finally got them to work a bit, but I was okay. I was fine.
Yeah. Well, it had to be so disheartening to have these solar stills and just think this is a potential unlimited source of fresh drinking water, yet for 10 days you couldn't get them to work. And you have to be sitting there thinking the amount of water I do have is surely not going to last me 2,000 miles across the Atlantic Ocean.
Oh, no. It was a critical problem. Absolutely critical. If I hadn't gotten them to work, like I say, I had very little rain. And people talked about, you can sponge off dew in the morning. It was like, no freaking you. It was like, once the blow went by, the air was like really super dry. It seemed like all the time, which was fortunate. See, everything has got its downside, but its upside. The great thing was that when I finally started catching fish, I could dry the fish sticks. They wouldn't go rotten. So I could build up a stock of fish for a long period of time. But, the downside was I was going to be probably shorter of water than I would like to be.
Yeah, right. Okay, so you're looking ahead to potentially 2,000 miles of floating, but you know that you have a chance of being seen by ships in the shipping lanes that you're coming up upon. So tell me about that. You had a little bit of hopeful moments and then moments of despair.
Yeah, I mean, I often tell people that's, I don't know, I don't know where you divide the line between normal life and survival, actually. But if you look at extreme circumstances, like in this case, you have highs and you have lows, but they're like super highs and super lows, and they can be really squished together in time, so that you can feel like the king of the world 1 second and be just like in the depths of despair like 5 minutes later, or vice versa. Depends on what happens. Like if you find a solution to a problem, like once I got the solar still to produce fresh water, it was like, that is super high. And so I was going, but about 2 weeks, by the second weekend, the ecosystem was really starting to fill in around the raft. Dorado or Mahi were around the raft pretty much all the time, and I was trying to spear them, and I finally caught a triggerfish, and that was really pretty bad, actually, but I was really hungry by that time. And then I caught a Dorado, my first Dorado, and that night I had it all stripped up. I had, food, and it was like, oh my God, this is so good. It tasted so good. And I went to, I dozed off. I could sleep about an hour at a time before getting cramped up and stuff. And all of a sudden there was like this Dorado flapping across the bottom of the raft, and then boom, like the raft got punched from the bottom. And it was a shark that had come up under one of the Dorado. At night, they would hover all around the raft all at night and just sort of travel with it. And so the shark was going after this Dorado, but then here's the raft, and boom, and so he's whacking at the raft, and I'm totally freaked out and trying to punch at it with my little spear gun. Not that it could have done him any damage, and finally I got a couple of good little hits into him. And but it was hard to see him because it's in the middle of the night, but you see the bioluminescence, this glittering glowing in the ocean from plankton, and so when something runs through it, the fish runs through it, you kind of see the outline and these little flashes, little stars. Mm-hmm. And so I'm poking at it, and finally it goes away, and so I lie back down again, and another Dorado hits the raft, and I jump up, of course, like immediately. And I look out, and there was a ship. That was the first ship, and I think that was 14 days in, something like that. And I had a really good arsenal of flares between what was in the raft and the ditch kit. I had flares in both of them and guns in both of them. So I signaled it, and I thought it had shifted its course and was coming at me. And it was a really clear night, kind of overcast, and really heavy clouds, but it was like down close to the water. It was like really sharp and clear. And so I'm celebrating, and I'm firing another flare, and I'm lighting off, as it gets closer, I'm lighting off hand flares and whatnot, and I'm drinking water because I'm sure that this ship is going to see me, but it just keeps going, it goes boom, 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 off into the kind of sunrise, and so that was it. And I was, I had all this fantasy how I just caught this Dorado and I was going to share it with the crew, and all this stuff, and I was like, no, that's not going to happen. So I was pretty disappointed, but I learned a good lesson because I drank water, precious water, rather than kind of saving it.
Right.
And I wasted too many flares. And by the end of the voyage, I can't remember how many ships passed me by now. I have to go back and look in the book now. But it was a lot, 6 ships, 8 ships, something like that I saw, not to mention ones that might have passed me when I, was asleep or something. So There were a lot, and two of them were probably within a mile. Like that first ship, I could smell the diesel in the air, and it goes by, and you're
Really?
kind of riding the wake. Yeah, yeah. It was way less than a mile, probably half mile something. And then the second, I think it was the second one actually was the second closest, and it was within a mile in the middle of the day. If somebody had been walking around on the deck, I could have told you, at least the color of their clothes and stuff like that. But that's the reality out there. People aren't looking for you, and it's really hard to see something, even if you know it's there and you're looking for it. Trust me, and I've been in big boats, and ships have a hard time seeing you on a big boat sometimes. So, life raft's pretty teeny.
Well, like you said, people, even if they were to see you, they don't really see you because they're not expecting something like that right there in front of them. So their mind tells them it's not there. I mean, we see that in a lot of instances. So you think, how crazy
Yeah.
is that a ship could be so close and not see you? But it's the reality. Sometimes your brain tells you something's not there when it really is.
Yeah, I think it's for mariners tend to be pretty focused though. If you see something odd, a mariner, I'm telling you just from experience, we always, your eye goes back to it. Like, actually, I used to be really good at seeing whales actually, because there's something like all of a sudden there's like this really subtle something change in the pattern of the water if it's there like under the surface, and you're always looking at stuff. And I'll tell you, mariners are really good about that. If they see something that looks like it might be an accident or a raft or something or other, they're there. That's the nature of the law of the sea. They're pretty on top of it. The problem with the ships is that the crews, they have very few crew. And there's, maybe the one guy's on the bridge, but he may be doing other stuff. He may be in the radio room or looking at the chart or whatever, and it only takes a few minutes and they're gone.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, it's really hard to see things for ships, even though they're up high and whatnot. That's why they are, even when you do drills, it's like retrieving people from the water and stuff is really, really difficult.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes sense. So you find yourself out the other side of the shipping lanes with no rescue, and you still have a long way to go because you're basically, you don't have a chance at going through shipping lanes or a chance at rescue until you get to the far side over to the islands, right?
Yeah, the shipping lanes aren't like highways exactly, but there are commonly traveled routes. And of course, the ships vary depending on weather conditions and stuff to save fuel and not get in bad weather and all that kind of stuff. So there are these kind of general roadways, and I crossed the first one. I can't remember. That probably was like a month or something into the voyage. But there would also be other shipping, especially like there's all the shipping along the coast and through the Caribbean up to the Florida and stuff like that, and occasional ships in other places. But once I got through the shipping, it was pretty clear that I was kind of through the shipping lane. By that time, I had adapted pretty well, actually. I had my kind of my little community. I named the raft Rubber Ducky, and basically you try to normalize life as much as possible and cling to routines and whatnot. So I'd get up in the morning, essentially, sun starts coming up. I had tables of declination. I navigated basically and did some kind of modified yoga exercises. And as the fish would start to be active and whatnot, it gave me a good chance to try to spear a fish. And I had to tend to the solar stills about every 10 or 15 minutes during the day in order to get production. They were quirky. Each one had kind of its own personality, and so the day would kind of proceed, and I had to keep the raft pumped up. I mean, it was busy. Or busy enough, although I had spare time and I could write. I had little pads of paper and I kept a log as any captain would. I tried to look at it as not as the end of a voyage, but a continuation and even more humble craft than Napoleon Solo. And, so I'd keep navigational notes, made a speed distance table and, all this stuff basically. Tried to make tools, tried to make other solar stills, which were a failure, unfortunately. But, you try stuff. You're always trying to figure out what might go wrong that you have some control over and prevent that. And then hopefully when things go wrong that you can't anticipate, figure out a way of dealing with it.
Yeah. And I see that, for your sheer sake of sanity, keeping your sanity, you got to normalize the situation and keep yourself occupied because what else do you do on a raft for 12, 13, 14 hours a day? You're not sitting there sleeping the whole time. It's like
Yeah.
Castaway, when he makes his volleyball, his friend Wilson there on the island.
Exactly right. Exactly right. I think people need if you look at survivors, and I've done a lot with survivors over the years, and not only read lots of cases but talked to lots of people and whatnot. And people are social animals. Like I worked on this movie Life of Pi, and a lot of that was he needed the tiger. For me, my tiger were the Dorado, and developing a relationship with the fish, the sort of love-death relationship, unfortunately for them, but being tuned into the environment, and they were my company. Other people, create characters or whatever, or they create a Wilson somehow.
Right.
That part of that movie actually really rang true to me. I thought that was a brilliant invention with the Wilson character.
Yeah, I'll bet.
Yeah. But anyway, so I had the Dorado. They were kind of my company.
Let's take a quick message break and hear from the folks that help make this show possible. I am a proud user of Manscaped. They are the revolutionary hair trimmer that a lot of men use. And our friends over at Manscaped have been working night and day to bring you below-the-waist grooming experience like none other with their brand new Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra. It's the next generation of trimmer with interchangeable blade heads for whatever shave your mind can imagine. Is it the biggest technological advancement of all time? I think it is. And that's why you need to get it and upgrade your grooming game to the Ultra Sphere this year by going to manscaped.com for 20% off plus free shipping with the code ADVENTURE at checkout. You can take it on the go. This puppy comes with a travel case, travel lock feature to avoid accidentally powering on or off. It's actually really handy. One of my headlamps just died the other night because it turned on by itself in my backpack. And speaking of lights, it has dual LED spotlights just like your regular lawnmower. So like I said, get 20% off plus free shipping with the code ADVENTURE at manscaped.com. It's very high tech for very low places. That is plenty of that for now. Let's get back into the episode.
So the Dorado, it's neat to see that they actually hung around the life raft. I wouldn't have expected that. I would have thought out in the middle of the Atlantic, there is no way something's going to come by and give you a chance to spear it. But they were hanging out. They were traveling with you, like you said.
Yeah, I try to explain it this way. Everything that floats in the ocean is like a little island, and it develops an island ecology eventually. You can have like a piece of rope or a light bulb or all kinds of things afloat for a while, and weeds will start growing on that, barnacles will grow, and fish will congregate under it. I've seen like a little piece of styrofoam with a big fish parked under it, and we sail by and like pick up the styrofoam and the fish starts darting around like, who took my house? And the Dorado I found were social animals, and so the school would gather, and by the end of it, I'd have probably 50 fish or something like all around the raft, and they would, they had their own routines. I got to know the fish really intimately, and their patterns. Each one, they had individual personality. They seemed to hunt in male-female pairs. I just was fascinated by these amazingly elegant creatures out there, and then they would hover around the raft all night, which is unbelievably beautiful because, like I say, everything's like bioluminescence. Anything passing through the water, it just kind of glitters and glows. And so I'd look out and there would be like, all around these like glowing silver platters under the ocean and stuff. So a lot of they were incredibly beautiful. So, it was always that mix of things. My wife says like one of the keys to Adrift for her is when I wrote in my log, it's a view of heaven from a seat in hell. Mm-hmm. And that was what that period of the voyage was. Once I had, in a way, it was not pleasant. I had, hundreds of saltwater sores, which were really getting increasingly painful. I had, I was thirsty all the time. I was starving. It wasn't a fun trip. but there were also these real highs in it, or like I say, fixing the solar still, or the Dorado would break the spear, and every time I'd figure out how to fix it again, that was like a little triumph and whatnot. So it was a very mixed experience, but and once I got to day 38, I kind of had a little party for me. I actually drank a pint of water. Usually I'd just take a little sip and kind of get absorbed, but I drank a pint of water because that was Dewey Robertson, with his family. Had spent 38 days. So if the beginning, it's like you always think there's no frigging way I'm ever going to get through this. And that's almost universal in survivors. And the initial stages are really tough because it's like, I don't know if I have the strength to figure this out and, withstand it.
Right.
But slowly you do, you figure things out and you adapt. And, so I was in that stage on day 38, but a few days later, the Dorados broke the spear and put a big hole in the bottom of the raft. And then I was like in for a 10-day really heavy-duty drama that really beat me up really badly. And I almost didn't make it out of that. But I finally figured out a solution, and that kind of entered a last stage of the voyage of just sort of hanging on day by day because it just got increasingly difficult.
Man, what an intense roller coaster this is. I mean, like you say, you have moments of celebration and viewing heaven from a seat in hell, and things are going great. You got Dorado, they're hanging out with you, and you can kill them and eat them. So you got your food, you got your solar stills making your water for you. And then the next thing you turn around, you spear a Dorado, you end up slashing the side of your raft, and then you're thinking, I'm done. This is, forget the view of heaven. There's no way I can get rescued if my life raft goes down. So now you have to deal with this turmoil of trying to fix this repair. And man, the emotional roller coaster's got to be insane. Yeah,
really, it is. It is insane. It's crazy. It's like, sometimes I use the metaphor, you're like on this knife edge the entire time, but you're over a canyon and you don't dare like get off it. So, I don't know. It's very intense, obviously. And, but, again, if you just kind of try to keep taking one step forward, and sometimes you take a couple steps back, but there are all kinds of strategies that you employ. I think I was pretty competent as a survivor overall. I used a lot of successful survival strategies of many survivors, like you have the end goal in sight, but you don't obsess about that. You obsess about the details that you need to deal with short term that could have long term bad consequences. You forget about your wants and you concentrate totally on needs, absolute need. And you do things like, I don't know, you get creative with stuff. It's, the movie Apollo 13 has a great line when, engineers are kept saying things like, oh, well, it wasn't designed to do this, it wasn't designed to do that. And the head of the operation basically says, I don't care what it was designed to do. I want to know what it can do. And that's what survivors do routinely. They use credit cards to signal airplanes and all kinds of weird stuff. So, I had quite a few tools and raw materials and set about doing stuff, but it was really, when the bottom of the raft went, it was like, I really didn't think I would get through that. The top was still afloat. I wasn't like I was going to sink, but it's kind of difficult to explain, but because there was like this big bubble of kind of quicksand in the middle of the raft, of rubber. And, there was only like a couple of inches of freeboard. So any waves that were coming by, there's a lot of water sloshing in and out. It made it really hard to deal with a solar still and impossible to fish. And so it was really critical. I figured that one out, but that's when another person would have been a real help, because I think they could have helped me figure out the solution before I did. It took me a while, but in the end, it was one of those things where it was a handle to a fork that I could employ as a pin to lash this, this thing up with. It was the only thing that worked. And once it did work, see, that was a huge, huge high, because I was so close to just laying down and meeting the end. And when it kind of occurred to me that I could use this pin and make this fix. And when it was fixed, it actually held air better than the top tube. And so that was like this super high, one of the biggest highs of my life, actually, just like this stupid little, tied together patch of a rubber raft. But it worked well. And so then, by that time, my body was pretty beaten up. I was exhausted. I had a lot of kind of wounds, chafe wounds and whatnot. And I was just like really beat. And by then I was close to the Caribbean, so the problem wasn't cold at night so much. It was staying cool enough during the day, because it was like baking. It was what I called the afternoon bake off. And I had to tend to the solar still, so I couldn't doze off or anything like that. It was really pretty brutal. But eventually each day would get towards the end and the sun would go down. And I've got this canopy on the top of the raft, like a tent, but there's an opening to it, sort of triangular opening. And I thought about it as my picture window, and I'd sit down and I'd have, whatever I had to eat and a swallow of water or whatnot, and try to get some rest and get up the next day and do it all over again. And eventually thinking I'm going to get to the Caribbean, I'm navigating. I got my latitude pretty well figured out, because I make the sextant out of pencils and measure the North Star, and so I know more or less my latitude, but I'm worried I'm going to get carried by the current up away above the islands of the Caribbean and get swept up in the Gulf Stream. Next stop, England, and that wouldn't have been good at all. So I'm trying to coax my drift south a little bit by dragging. I had this rope out the back that had a pole on it that increased my visibility, and I rode barnacles on it and used it as a speedometer and whatnot. I could park that on one side of the raft to kind of encourage the drift a very, very little bit south. But I didn't know if my navigation was good at all, because I kept expecting to see the islands. But then eventually I started seeing, signs, changes. Like, I went through this period of drifting through, I called it the road of trash. It was mostly weed, but all kinds of human refuse too. Bottles and cans and crates and, all kinds of stuff. A tire, all that kind of junk. Just stretched out from horizon to horizon. I kind of drifted through these strings of this stuff and whatnot for a while, and birds started showing up, different birds like terns and stuff like that. So I knew I should be getting close, but I really had no idea, because I was a little optimistic in how far I thought I'd gone west, and I thought I should be seeing islands, and they weren't there. But it was just hanging in day by day until it finally happened.
Right. Well, you mentioned the rope and the pole. You and being able to use that as a speedometer. I read that, and I was actually, in these moments, obviously, I can sit here comfortably in a computer chair and talk to you on a microphone, and you don't think you'd ever come up with something like that. But that was pretty impressive to see that you had used something like that to do some of your navigation. I mean, we can navigate by celestial means, but to figure out how fast across the ocean we're traveling in a life raft, how do you do that? And you did this with a rope and pole. So explain that a little bit.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I can't remember how many feet it was, 70 feet or something like that. And so I made up a little speed distance table, how many seconds it goes for that 70 feet, and, you can work back from miles. And so I knew if something floated by like a piece of weed and it took, 12 seconds to get to the pole, I was going like half a knot, which would be fast at the raft. Or I could tell if it was going kind of quarter knot. It wasn't perfect, but that's really kind of in the almost. I reverted, like everything else, to primitive systems,
right?
Called primitive systems. But you get tuned into the environment. That's how people navigated for years and years. It was very difficult to tell longitude until the invention of the chronometer, because you need time difference of where the stars move across the Earth. But if the North Pole, if you're standing on the North Pole, the North Star is basically 90 degrees of the horizon. You're at 90 degrees latitude. And if you're on the equator, it's basically bouncing on horizon 0 degrees. So it just works out that, every degree up is a degree. So I could measure that. And, but in terms of the mile, sorry, I got kind of lost. That was for the sextant. In the miles, you just make a speed distance table and say, okay, a piece of weed's going back there and I'm going a quarter knot. Plus I had a chart which had average current which probably was a little inaccurate. I've found pilot charts are based on ship information over long periods of time, and they're generally right, but there are a lot of exceptions. So, I kind of had an idea how fast I was going. Like basically, a decent day was 25 miles, and I just marked that off on the chart till work my way west.
Yeah, that's neat.
And at night, you have you have all kinds of stars up there, so you kind of know what direction you're going in.
Right. Okay, so day after day, you're floating on this raft across the Atlantic Ocean, and many days they have their ups and downs, but eventually one day, day 76, is your big day. Go through that day and describe what your feelings were when you finally saw some land, and then eventually saw some people.
Yeah, really, it's kind of started on the 75th night, because I started seeing lights, and I thought they might be ships, or by the clustering of them, I thought, well, maybe they're fishing fleets. Like in the Bay of Biscay, you see lots of, clusters of like fishing boats and whatnot. And they seem not to be moving that fast either, which is like fishing boats if they're engaged. So, I saw these glows, and I don't know. So I go to sleep, and for an hour or so, I really couldn't rest that much because I was in a lot of pain and, kind of sore pains and cramps and all this stuff. So I'd get up about every 45 minutes or an hour, and the lights wouldn't move, and they didn't move, and they didn't move. And then I started seeing the loom of the lighthouse, which is a pulse of glow. And so I thought, oh, that's it. That's definitely land. And by the time the sun rose, I could see actually I was closer to the islands than I thought I would be. I was amazed that I hadn't seen them when when it got dark, before it got dark. And so I could see like little houses behind this beach on the south side of the island. But there was a reef outlying the beach quite a ways out, and a lot of breakers. You got the whole Atlantic Ocean kind of sweeping across and breaking against that. And the north side of the island was a definite no-go, because that was all coral cliffs, and it was like I'd just be smashed to bits against that. So I started figuring out how I might guide myself around, hopefully the south side of the island. If I went across the reef, I was going to wrap myself up in with the cushion and stuff that I had, and just try to get her across the reef, or preferably guide the raft around the side of the island and land on the other side. And I'm sorting things out when I started hearing this engine, and these West Indian guys are coming out in a boat. Clements is probably about the size of Napoleon Solo, maybe 20, 25 feet, somewhere in there, and with an outboard, open boat, and they're coming out, and they see me. I wave to them, and they wave back. I've been seen, and I was just like staggered that here it is. Somehow this is all going to end very soon. And they come up to the raft, and I have a hard time understanding them. I don't know what they're speaking. It turns out to be Creole, Caribbean Creole, which is French, but it's such a dialect, it's like almost unrelated. I didn't know if it was Spanish, what it was. And one of them was speaking English, but it was really heavy accent. And he basically said, asked me what I'm doing out there, because they see people go across. Like I say, it's usually the milk run. You're doing that trip. You're in the trade winds, you kind of blow across downwind. And so people have gone across in all kinds of things. Some Englishmen went across in some modified barrel once, and Frenchmen went across in a beach cat. They were prepared, they were totally prepared to do that. But, they had no idea if I was just like some fruitcake who was in some weird boat or something. But I got it across to them that I'd been shipwrecked and whatnot, and they asked me if I wanted to go into the island, and I don't know, I just kind of burst out. It was just like I was so overjoyed to have them there, and they were, godsend. And here I had these fish, and the fish at this point, I mean, really, they're kind of I'm really a clumsy human observer of this amazing environment I went through, and it all centered, the fish kind of represent a lot of the magic and the mystery of the sea, because it turns out they were, they gave me my sustenance. They became my friends in many cases. I knew a lot of them individually, and in the end, they brought my salvation, because as the raft got close to the shore, frigate birds were coming out from the island, and they were hovering above the raft, because they all feed on what the Dorado do, the flying fish, and that's why these guys were here. But I wasn't thinking about all this at the time. I just had this amazing feeling. All I had to give these guys were these fish that had followed me across the ocean. So I told them to fish for a while, and they would zoom off, and they're catching fish, and they're flying into the boat and whatnot. And they kept coming by and asked me if there was anything. They'd asked me if there was anything I wanted. And I said, "Oh Jesus, man, if you got any kind of fresh fruit or anything," they said, "No, we don't have any of that." And they zoomed off, and when they came back, and they handed me this thing in a brown paper wrapped up, and I opened it up, and it was a coca sucre, which is basically just raw sugar and coconut boiled in raw sugar. And that thing was just the most amazing thing I think I've ever eaten in my life. And so they fished for a while, and then it was getting to be the afternoon bake-off. I was having a harder time as the sun was coming up and getting hot, and they could see that. So they came by, and fish was all loaded up the boat was all loaded up with fish. And they said they'd never gone to that side of the island before either, which I thought was really interesting. They just decided to go on the windward side of the island for the first time ever, and they got the best catch that they had ever had. So I thought I was pleased with that. But I also felt a bit of a Judas, because there I was sitting amongst all the fish that I knew, and it kept me alive, and were amazing beings in their own right. So.
Wow, that's amazing.
So then we zoomed into the island, and that was that.
Wow. So you drift 76 days, thousands of miles across the Atlantic Ocean. You finally reach a human being, and you let him go fish. You let him go. I don't know if I could do that. I mean, I'd probably latch onto those guys and never let go.
Yeah, I don't know. A lot of people seem surprised about that, but it was a very visceral thing. A lot about the voyage is very visceral. It really teaches you how much of an animal you are. Again, also referenced in kind of in the Life of Pi thing, because there's a lot of that in there about becoming the beast. It's living at a very primitive level, and you realize that there's very little separation between oneself and every animal in the environment. There's the sacredness to everything you eat and kill in order to keep yourself alive. And I don't know, I became really acutely aware of that. And yet we need to eat to survive. And here were these fish, and I don't know, amazing creatures. And I kind of I often thought about, they end up in all these dinner plates in hotels and restaurants and stuff, and nobody knew their history, but me.
Yeah. Very interesting.
But they were kind of spreading their own spirit, and that's lived on in my life since. The whole Adrift thing and the Dorado and whatnot, because we brought a lot of that alive when making Life of Pi. The whole thing about the environment and the way there's like this whole community, and you're on this roadway going across the ocean, and so it was very interesting that Adrift, the whole experience, and the Dorado would bring, this Hollywood director to my door, and I'd work on this amazing project. So I don't know, I guess the voyage never really ends.
Yeah, that's probably true. Well, what an amazing story. That is, it just blows me away that, the mental survival, in this whole situation is achievable. You think, what on earth would I do for that many months, riding these ups and downs of emotions? How would I survive it? But obviously you did, and it's got to obviously it's changed your life. From that point on.
It's led me down all kinds of roads to meet people I would never have met before, coming back, doing the book and doing a lot more writing in my life, publishing and film projects and all kinds of stuff. So, definitely my life would not be at all the same. And it gave me a lot of impetus to come back and kind of fix things that were, the reasons I left the United States to begin with. My life being kind of in shambles and not being very good with relationships and all kinds of stuff. To come back and kind of rebuild a life again. And I find that that's often a commonality with other survivors too. It's not like we want to have that experience again, but we learn so much from them. They become, really big building blocks of our life. So you don't want to go back there, but you don't mind having taken the trip.
Yeah, I can see that. All right. Well, if you guys want to go read in detail Steve's story, the book is Adrift, 76 Days Lost at Sea. It's been a New York Times bestseller. I am definitely going to be picking it up myself because I want to get definitely dig in to more detail about this story and see what it was like for you day in, day out. So, Steve, thanks so much for spending the time to tell me and the listeners about your story. I can't wait to read the book.
Well, thank you, Travis. I appreciate your interest in, happy voyaging wherever you end up.
Absolutely. All right. You take care.
Yeah, you too. Thanks.
Right, thanks.
Bye-bye.
First of all, thank you so much for listening. It means the world to us that you choose to listen to the show. If you'd like to help us further, you can leave a review on iTunes, share us with your friends, your family. It goes a long way to grow in the show. You can also support us financially through patreon.com/adventuresportspodcast. Link is in the show notes. And also, if you have an idea of who could be a good guest for the show, we're always looking for people to tell their story about the outdoors or adventure. So if you know someone, please reach out. Email us at info@adventuresportspodcast.com. And until then, get out there and have some fun.